The drive to the Harrison Hotel took Sarah Mitchell far beyond the city limits, where the landscape grew wild and the roads narrower with each passing mile. The GPS signal flickered out, leaving her to navigate the last stretch by instinct. As she finally approached the hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was entering a place forgotten by time. The building loomed in the distance, a grand structure once, but now its age showed in the peeling paint, cracked windows, and overgrown weeds that choked the driveway. The hotel's exterior, bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun, seemed almost alive, its shadows stretching unnaturally long, as if reaching out to her. She parked her car, the gravel crunching loudly in the oppressive silence. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, mingling with something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. As Sarah approached the entrance, she noticed the windows, dark and reflective, staring back at her with an unsettling stillness. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, Sarah stepped into the lobby. The temperature dropped noticeably, a chill that sank into her bones. The space was dimly lit by antique sconces that cast flickering shadows on the walls, their light feeble against the encroaching darkness. A grand chandelier hung above, its once gleaming crystals now dull, barely catching the light. The air inside was thick with dust, every breath she took carrying the musty scent of a place long neglected. The receptionist, an elderly woman with thinning white hair and watery blue eyes, greeted her with a strained smile. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed Sarah the key to room 217, her voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome to the Harrison Hotel, Miss Mitchell," she said, her gaze flitting nervously around the room as if she expected something or someone to appear at any moment. "You're in 217, special room." The words hung in the air, laden with unspoken meaning. Sarah noticed the woman's hesitation, the way she avoided eye contact as if she were ashamed or afraid. But before Sarah could ask any questions, the receptionist was already turning away, her posture stiff and uneasy. As Sarah made her way to the staircase, she noticed the few other guests in the lobby, all of them unnervingly silent, their faces pale and drawn. They moved slowly, almost mechanically, their eyes glazed over with a distant, haunted look. No one returned her tentative smile or acknowledged her presence. The atmosphere was thick with an oppressive sense of isolation, as if the hotel existed in a world apart, detached from the reality outside its walls. The staircase creaked under her weight, each step echoing ominously through the empty halls. The carpet, once plush and vibrant, was now worn and threadbare, its pattern barely discernible beneath the layers of dust. As she climbed, Sarah felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, like the lightest touch of cold fingers brushing against her skin. She turned quickly, but the hallway behind her was empty, the only movement the slow swaying of the chandelier far below. When she finally reached room 217, the door stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for her. A shiver ran down her spine, but she brushed it off as nerves. Pushing the door open, she stepped inside. The room was spacious, but the decor was dated, frozen in time. Faded floral wallpaper, heavy velvet drapes, and a four-poster bed covered in a dusty quilt. Everything was coated in a thin layer of neglect, as though it had been untouched for years. But it was the mirror that had caught her attention. An antique oval mirror hung on the wall opposite the bed, its glass clouded with age. As Sarah approached it, she noticed something strange. Her reflection seemed distorted, the features slightly blurred as if seen through a fog. She frowned, wiping the glass with her sleeve, but the image remained the same. A whisper of unease crept into her mind, but she shook it off, attributing it to her exhaustion. That night, as she lay in bed, the room felt colder than it should have been, the blankets providing little warmth. She closed her eyes, trying to drift off to sleep, but the silence was unnerving. Then, just as she was on the edge of sleep, she heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the walls. It was rhythmic, almost like someone knocking softly, but too deliberate to be random. Tap, tap, tap. The sound seemed to move around the room, first from one corner, then the other, as if something or someone was circling her. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. The room was dark, the only light a sliver of moonlight filtering through the curtains. She strained to listen, but the tapping had stopped. She told herself it was just the old pipes, or perhaps the settling of the ancient building. But then, just as she was about to close her eyes again, she heard something else. A faint whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible. It was coming from right behind her. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. The whispering was too low to make out any words, but the tone was unmistakably menacing. She slowly turned over, her pulse racing, but the room was empty. The whispering stopped, leaving her in a silence so profound it was almost suffocating. The air was thick, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The unease she had felt since arriving had blossomed into full-blown fear. Something was wrong with this place, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but it was there, lurking just out of sight. And as the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, she knew one thing for certain. The Harrison Hotel was no ordinary place. It was hiding something, and she was determined to find out what. The morning light did little to ease the tension that had settled in Sarah's chest. The sun, though bright, seemed to have lost its warmth by the time it reached the Harrison Hotel. As she stepped out of her room, she noticed that the corridors were eerily silent, the air still heavy with a sense of foreboding. The few guests she saw moved about in a daze, their eyes downcast, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. Determined to shake off the unease from the previous night, Sarah decided to explore the hotel, hoping to distract herself and maybe uncover some interesting details for her article. The lobby, with its high ceilings and faded grandeur, felt more like a mausoleum than a welcoming space. The chandelier that had swayed gently the evening before now hung ominously still, its crystals catching the light in a way that seemed almost mocking. Sarah approached the front desk, where the same elderly receptionist from the night before stood, her hands fidgeting with a stack of old postcards. The woman's demeanor was no different, her nervousness now more apparent in the harsh light of day. Sarah decided to press for more information. "This hotel must have quite a history," Sarah began, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about it, maybe some of the stories?" The receptionist hesitated, her fingers pausing mid-motion. She glanced around as if to ensure they were alone, then leaned in slightly. "It's old, miss, very old. It's seen things, heard things." Her voice trailed off, and she seemed to shrink into herself, as if the weight of her words was too much to bear. "But it's not for me to say. You might want to speak with Mr. Thompson, the local historian. He knows more than most." Intrigued, Sarah thanked the woman and decided to take a walk into the small town. The streets were quiet, lined with buildings that seemed frozen in time. The few residents she passed gave her curious, almost pitying looks, as though they knew something she didn't. After a brief search, she found the library, a quaint building that looked more like an oversized cottage. Inside, the smell of old books in polished wood was comforting, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the hotel. Behind the counter sat Mr. Thompson, a man in his late 60s with thinning gray hair and round spectacles perched on his nose. He greeted her warmly, though his eyes held a guarded expression. After exchanging pleasantries, Sarah wasted no time in getting to the point. "I'm staying at the Harrison Hotel," she began, watching for his reaction. His smile faltered and his expression turned serious. "Ah, the Harrison," he said, his tone heavy with meaning. "Not many choose to stay there these days." "Why is that?" Sarah asked, leaning in slightly. Mr. Thompson sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "That place, it has a history, all right. Not all of it is pleasant." He gestured for her to follow him, leading her to a small study at the back of the library. The room was lined with shelves, each packed with books and binders thick with local records. He pulled out a worn leather-bound book and opened it to a marked page. "Evelyn Parker," he said, pointing to a grainy black and white photograph of a young woman. "She checked into room 217 over 50 years ago and never left." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at the photograph. Evelyn was beautiful with dark hair and a serene expression, but there was something unsettling about her eyes, as if they were hiding something. "What happened to her?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one knows for sure," Mr. Thompson replied, his tone somber. "Evelyn was a socialite, traveling alone on what was supposed to be a short retreat. But from the moment she arrived, she claimed the hotel was different. She spoke of whispers in the night, of feeling watched, of seeing things in the mirrors that shouldn't have been there. The staff thought she was going mad. Sarah's heart pounded as she listened, the details too close to her own experience. "And then," she prompted. "One night she vanished," he said, closing the book with a heavy thud. The room was locked from the inside, her belongings untouched, but Evelyn was gone. They searched the hotel and the surrounding area for weeks but found nothing. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. The room seemed to grow colder as he spoke, the air thickening with an oppressive weight. "But that's not all," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Every 50 years, a woman who looks remarkably like Evelyn checks into that same room and disappears, always on the same day, June 17th. Sarah felt her blood run cold. "June 17th, she repeated, the date ringing in her ears. It was her own birthday. "Yes," Mr. Thompson confirmed, his gaze intense, and each time the whispers grow louder, as if the hotel is waiting for something or someone. A creeping sense of dread settled over Sarah as she realized the implications. The strange occurrences, the whispers, her unsettling resemblance to Evelyn Parker. It all pointed to something far more sinister than she had imagined. The hotel wasn't just a place with a dark history, it was a living entity, feeding off the fear and souls of those who stayed within its walls. That night, as Sarah returned to the Harrison Hotel, the building seemed even more foreboding than before. The shadows stretched longer, the silence thicker, and the air colder. The whispers started earlier this time, faint but persistent, following her as she moved through the hallways. When she reached her room, she hesitated at the door, her hand trembling as she inserted the key. Inside, the room was exactly as she had left it, but something felt off. The mirror on the wall seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and the air was heavy with a sense of anticipation, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath. The whispers grew louder as the night wore on, filling the room with an unintelligible chorus. Sarah lay in bed, wide awake, her mind racing with what she had learned. There was no escaping the fact that she was connected to this place in ways she couldn't yet understand. And with each passing hour, the hotel's grip on her tightened, drawing her deeper into its dark, twisted history. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Sarah knew that whatever haunted the Harrison Hotel wasn't finished with her yet. The history of Evelyn Parker was only the beginning. The revelations from the previous day haunted Sarah as she wandered through the Harrison Hotel, unable to shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far beyond her understanding. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air growing thicker with each step she took. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the dim lights, felt like the hotel was speaking to her, beckoning her deeper into its twisted embrace. Desperate for answers, Sarah returned to her room and dug through her belongings, searching for anything that might explain the eerie connection between her and Evelyn Parker. She rifled through old notebooks, travel guides, and personal items, but found nothing until her hand brushed against the edge of a photograph tucked away in her wallet. It was a picture of her as a child, standing beside her mother, taken on her 5th birthday. She stared at it, a wave of nostalgia washing over her, until something caught her eye. There, in the background, was a faint, almost imperceptible image of a building. Sarah squinted, bringing the photo closer, and her heart skipped a beat. It was the Harrison Hotel, its facade unmistakable even in the blurred image. How had she never noticed it before? She had no memory of ever visiting the hotel as a child, yet here it was, captured in a photograph taken decades ago. The realization sent a chill down her spine. Haunted by this discovery, Sarah decided to return to the library to see Mr. Thompson, hoping he could help her make sense of it all. But as she stepped outside the hotel, the town seemed different, darker, more oppressive. The sky was overcast, and the air carried a strange stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. When she arrived at the library, the door was locked, the lights off. The small, handwritten sign on the door read, "Closed for the day." Frustrated but undeterred, Sarah decided to search for answers on her own. She spent the afternoon driving around the town, visiting the few public buildings that remained open, asking locals if they knew anything about Evelyn Parker. Most were tight-lipped, their eyes shifting nervously whenever she mentioned the Harrison Hotel. It was as if the entire town had conspired to forget the hotel's dark past, to bury it deep where it couldn't reach them. But one elderly Troanin sitting alone on a park bench seemed willing to talk. His weathered face and roomy eyes gave him an air of wisdom tempered by sorrow. "You're the one staying at the Harrison, aren't you?" he asked, his voice raspy. Sarah nodded, sitting beside him, her curiosity piqued. Yes, I'm trying to understand what happened to Evelyn Parker. Do you know anything about her? The old man sighed, his gaze distant. Evelyn, she wasn't the first, you know. Every 50 years, the hotel claims another one. Always the same. Young women, and all resembling each other, like they're drawn to that cursed place. And each time, the town does its best to forget, to move on. But the hotel, it never forgets. What do you mean the hotel claims them? Sarah pressed, her heart pounding. The Harrison Hotel, the man said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. It's alive in a way. It feeds off them, their fear, their pain, and it never lets go. You're connected to it now, just like Evelyn was. You're part of its story. The words struck Sarah like a physical blow. The photograph, the whispers, the unease she had felt since arriving, they all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. She was destined to become part of the hotel's history, just like Evelyn. But why her? What was the connection? Do you know why it's me? She asked, her voice trembling. The old man turned to her, his expression grave. I don't know why, only that it's always been this way. The hotel chooses its victims, and once it does, there's no escaping it. Your only hope is to leave and never look back. But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. The hotel had already marked her, drawn her into its web, and something deep inside her told her that running wouldn't save her. It would only delay the inevitable. That night, back in room 217, Sarah examined the photograph again, her mind racing. The connection between her and Evelyn was undeniable, but there had to be something more, something the hotel wanted from her. She paced the room, the whispers now a constant, maddening presence. They weren't just random sounds anymore. They were speaking to her, calling her by name, urging her to remember something just out of reach. In a moment of desperation, Sarah grabbed the mirror from the wall and hurled it across the room. It shattered with a deafening crash, shards scattering across the floor. But as the glass broke, a hidden compartment in the wall was revealed. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the hotel had been hiding something from her. Inside the compartment was a small, weathered box. Hands trembling, Sarah opened it to find an old diary. The leather cover cracked and faded. The name inscribed on the first page made her blood run cold. Evelyn Parker. The pages were filled with entries detailing Evelyn's final days at the hotel, her growing paranoia, the whispers, the dreams of a woman who looked just like her. The last entry, dated June 16, 1964, ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if Evelyn had been interrupted or had suddenly disappeared. Sarah's heart pounded as she reached the end of the diary, where a folded piece of paper was tucked between the pages. Unfolding it, she found a birth certificate, Evelyn Parker's birth certificate. But the date of birth stopped her cold, June 17, 1914, the exact same day as her own. It wasn't just a resemblance or a coincidence. Sarah was Evelyn's descendant, a granddaughter or even a great-granddaughter, bound to her by blood and by the hotel's curse. The hotel had chosen her because it was part of her family's legacy, a legacy of fear, madness, and disappearance. As the realization dawned on her, the room grew colder, the air thickening with the presence of something malevolent. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, surrounding her, filling her mind with unbearable pressure. The walls seemed to close in and the shadows stretched longer, darker, more threatening. The hotel wasn't just a haunted place. It was a prison, a predator, and Sarah was its latest prey. The connection she had with Evelyn was more than just blood. It was a cycle, one that she was now a part of, and there was no escape. The Harrison Hotel had claimed her, just as it had claimed Evelyn, and it wouldn't let go until it had taken everything from her. With this horrifying knowledge, Sarah knew she was running out of time. The hotel had drawn her in, connected her to its dark past, and now it was ready to complete the cycle. As the clock ticked toward midnight, she realized that the final confrontation was coming, and she would have to face whatever the hotel had in store for her. The walls of room 217 seemed to pulse with a life of their own as Sarah stood in the center of the room, clutching Evelyn Parker's diary in one hand and the birth certificate in the other. The air was thick, almost suffocating, filled with the incessant whispers that had plagued her since she arrived. But now they had taken on a new tone, one of urgency, almost desperation, as if the hotel itself knew that the end was near. The connection between Sarah and Evelyn had become undeniable. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the hotel seemed to tighten its grip on her with each passing second. There was no escaping it now. She had to face whatever it was that had drawn her here, the force that had claimed Evelyn and so many others before her. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The clock on the nightstand ticked louder, each second hammering at Sarah's nerves. Midnight was fast approaching, and with it, a sense of dread so powerful it made her skin crawl. She knew that whatever was coming, it would happen soon. Determined to confront the malevolent force head-on, Sarah decided to return to the place where it all began. Evelyn's room. She stepped into the hallway, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath her feet. The hotel was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The whispers followed her, growing louder, more insistent, guiding her toward the end of the hallway where room 217 awaited. As she reached the door, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. A cold, clammy sweat broke out on her forehead as the realization of what she was about to face sank in. But there was no turning back now. The hotel had chosen her, and she had to see this through to the end. With a deep breath, she turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something far more ancient, more sinister. The only light came from the moon, which cast long, menacing shadows through the single cracked window. The room was just as she had left it, yet somehow different, charged with an almost palpable energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She stepped on the sun and the door slammed shut behind her with a force that shook the walls. The whispers intensified, swirling around her like a cyclone of voices, all merging into one incomprehensible chant. Sarah clutched the diary to her chest, her heart pounding as she tried to steady her breathing. The mirror on the wall, the one she had shattered earlier, was whole again, its surface rippling as if it were made of liquid rather than glass. Sarah approached it slowly, her reflection distorted and twisted, mirroring the fear and confusion she felt deep inside. As she stared into the mirror, the whispers suddenly coalesced into a single clear voice. Evelyn's voice, fragile yet commanding. "You shouldn't have come back," it said, echoing through the room. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized she wasn't alone. The air around her thickened, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "I had no choice," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I had to know the truth." The mirror shimmered, and for a moment the room seemed to dissolve around her. She was no longer in the hotel, but in a different place entirely, a dark, endless void where time and space held no meaning. The only constant was the presence of something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting for her all along. And then she saw Evelyn. The young woman stood before her, dressed in the same 1960s clothing she had seen in the photograph, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow with a sorrow that went beyond death. She looked at Sarah with a mixture of recognition and pity, as if seeing a reflection of her own doomed fate. "You're like me," Evelyn said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We're connected, by blood, by time, by the hotel." Sarah's breath hitched as she struggled to comprehend what was happening. Why me? Why now? Evelyn's expression hardened, and the room seemed to darken further, the shadows closing in around them. "Because it's not just the hotel that's cursed, it's our family. The women in our line are drawn here, bound to this place by a force older than the hotel itself. Every 50 years, one of us returns, and the cycle begins again." Sarah's heart sank as the truth finally came crashing down on her. The hotel wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, a prison for the souls of the women in her family, designed to perpetuate an endless cycle of fear and death. And now it was her turn. "You can't fight it," Evelyn continued, her voice tinged with resignation. "The hotel will take what it wants, as it always has. But maybe, just maybe, we can end this." "How?" Sarah asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Evelyn reached out, her hand passing through the mirror's surface as if it were water. "You have to confront it. The source of the curse, the force that feeds on our fear, it's in the heart of the hotel. You have to go where no one has ever dared." Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had no idea where the heart of the hotel was, but she knew she had to try. If there was even a chance of breaking the cycle, she had to take it. The room around her began to twist and distort, the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. The hotel was reacting to her resolve, tightening its grip on her as if sensing her defiance. The whispers turned to screams, echoing through her mind, pushing her toward the brink of madness. With a final, desperate plea, Evelyn's voice broke through the chaos. "Find it, Sarah! Find the heart and destroy it before it's too late!" The void collapsed around her, and Sarah was flung back into the physical world, crashing onto the floor of room 217. Dazed and disoriented, she struggled to her feet, the weight of the hotel's malevolence pressing down on her like a suffocating shroud. She knew what she had to do. The hotel wouldn't let her go easily, but she was determined to fight, to break the curse that had plagued her family for generations. Clutching the diary tightly, she stepped out of the room and into the dark hallway, the oppressive silence broken only by the distant, rhythmic pounding of something deep within the bowels of the building. The heart of the hotel was calling to her, and she had no choice but to answer. The hallways twisted and turned as she descended deeper into the hotel, the architecture becoming increasingly warped and unnatural. It was as if the building itself was alive, shifting and changing to keep her from reaching her goal. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the air grew colder with each step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah reached a door at the end of a narrow, claustrophobic corridor. It was old, weathered, and unlike any other door she had seen in the hotel. The wood was dark, almost black, and engraved with symbols that seemed to writhe and twist under her gaze. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open. Beyond it lay a vast, cavernous space that shouldn't have been possible within the confines of the hotel. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting distorted, nightmarish images of the women who had come before her. Evelyn, her mother, her grandmother, all staring back at her with hollow eyes. At the center of the room, pulsating with a sickly red light, was the heart of the hotel. It was a twisted, organic mass throbbing with malevolent energy, feeding on the fear and despair of those it had claimed. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices that filled the space, demanding her submission. But Sarah wasn't here to submit. She was here to fight. She approached the heart, the diary clutched tightly in one hand, her other hand reaching out to the pulsating mass. The moment her fingers touched the surface, a surge of energy coursed through her, nearly knocking her off her feet. But she held on, focusing also her will on breaking the curse that had bound her family for so long. The heart resisted, its energy lashing out at her, filling her mind with visions of horror and despair. She saw Evelyn's final moments, her mother's struggles, her grandmother's silent suffering, all the pain and fear that had been passed down through generations. But Sarah refused to give in. She drew strength from their memories, their sacrifices, and pushed back against the darkness with everything she had. As she poured all her strength into the heart, the mirrors around her began to shatter. One by one. The images of her ancestors faded, their spirits finally free from the hotel's grip. The whispers turned to screams, and the heart convulsed violently, its light flickering as the curse began to unravel. With a final desperate cry, Sarah drove the diary into the heart, the old leather and paper igniting in a burst of flames. The heart shuddered, its light dimming as the flames consumed it. The screams grew louder, more frantic, until they were cut off completely. The heart imploded, collapsing in on itself, taking the last vestiges of the curse with it. The hotel shuddered, the walls cracking and crumbling as the heart of the hotel imploded, a blinding light filled the cavernous room, searing through the darkness that had long held the building captive. The mirrors shattered in a symphony of glass and despair, each shard reflecting the fleeting moments of terror that had been woven into the very fabric of the Harrison Hotel. Sarah felt herself being pulled into the light, the force of the explosion knocking her off her feet. When the light faded, she found herself lying on the floor of room 217, gasping for breath. The oppressive weight that had suffocated her spirit was gone, replaced by a profound silence that enveloped her like a warm blanket. The shadows that had once clung to the walls retreated, revealing the faded elegance of the room stripped of its dark energy. But as Sarah stood up, her heart racing with a mix of triumph and confusion, a sense of unease washed over her. Had she truly ended the curse? Had she freed her family from the hotel's grasp? Or had she merely set the stage for something new, something equally terrifying? She stumbled toward the door, pushing it open to step into the hallway. The hotel felt different now, quieter, less menacing, but there was still an undercurrent of something unsettling, a sensation that she was being watched. The walls no longer whispered, but the echoes of the past remained, etched into the very structure of the building. As Sarah made her way down the dimly lit corridor, she was drawn to the lobby. The once vibrant space now seemed hollow, as if the life had been drained from it. The front desk, once a hub of activity, sat empty and abandoned, the only sound the soft rustling of dust as it settled on the worn furnishings. She approached the front door, the promise of freedom just beyond it, but an unexpected urge held her back. There was something she needed to do first, something that felt right. Turning back to the lobby, she walked to the hall adorned with framed photographs of past guests. Each smiling face seemed to reflect a piece of the hotel's history, but one photograph caught her eye, a faded image of a group of young women from decades past. Among them stood Evelyn, radiant and alive, her eyes shining with a joy that belied her tragic fate. A sudden impulse surged within Sarah, one she couldn't ignore. She reached up and removed the photograph from its frame, the glass cracked and dulled. As she held it in her hands, a thought struck her. This was not just a photograph. It was a tribute to the lives that had been lost, the souls that had been trapped within the hotel's dark embrace. With determination, Sarah returned to the lobby's central space and found an old wooden box, once used for keeping guest belongings. She placed the photograph inside along with Evelyn's diary. It felt fitting to honor the women who had come before her, to acknowledge their pain and suffering. As she closed the box, a sudden chill swept through the lobby, and the lights flickered ominously. The room grew darker, the shadows creeping back as a sense of dread washed over her. The whispers had returned, not menacing this time, but sorrowful, almost pleading. It was as if the hotel was acknowledging her act of remembrance, both grateful and resentful. With newfound clarity, Sarah understood that while she had broken the curse, the hotel's legacy could never be fully erased. The stories of the women lost to its darkness would linger on, woven into the very fabric of the building. She had given them a voice, a place to rest, but their memory would always be part of the Harrison Hotel. As she stepped outside, the air felt lighter, the sky brightening as dawn broke on the horizon. The town was quiet, but there was a sense of hope in the air. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the echoes of the past would forever be a part of her. Yet as she looked back at the hotel, she felt a nagging sensation that the cycle might not be completely broken. While she had freed her ancestors, the hotel was still standing, its walls steeped in history and pain. It could still draw in those who were lost or searching for something they could never find, a place to belong. In that moment, she realized the truth. The Harrison Hotel would always remain a place of haunting memories, a sanctuary for lost souls seeking closure, even as new lives intersected with its tragic past. The cycle of attraction and tragedy would continue as the hotel stood sentinel over its secrets. With one last glance at the hotel, Sarah turned away, ready to forge a new path. She had stepped into the light, emerging from the shadows of her family's history, but the hotel would forever be a part of her story, a reminder that the past never truly disappears, but rather transforms, leaving its mark on those who dare to confront it. And as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel would always be waiting, patiently watching for the next soul to wander through its doors, drawn by the echoes of history and the allure of its dark charm. The cycle would continue, for the Harrison Hotel was a living testament to the lives it had claimed, forever entwined with the stories of those who had come before and those yet to come.